Hey everyone, welcome to our next virtual developer meetup with Orkes. Today we're going to be talking all about AI agents and agentic workflows. If that's familiar to you, right on. If it's not, that's totally fine. That's the point of today, is to kind of get into it, give you a primer as to what those things actually are. But then Haven here is going to jump into a demo. We're going to talk through some of the more detailed components of building agents, what agentic workflows are, whether you've heard of those or not, how these work together, etc. So yeah, we'll get into it. Haven, morning. Do you want to give everyone a quick intro to who you are, what you do, all that?
I'd love to. Hey everyone, my name is Hayman King. I'm an engineer here at Orkes. I work a lot with our customer side, whether that's going to be going to events, speaking at conferences, or helping individual customers build out their use cases on top of Orkes for not just AI orchestration, but orchestration as kind of a general pattern and approach to building systems and services. That's my very quick 5-second introduction. I don't know how much more you might want me to give on that, Jeff.
Oh, anything you want. What do you like to do? Long walks on the beach? What are your hobbies? I don't know. Whatever you like to. Oh, okay.
Well, our beaches in Seattle are not known for being the best,
Okay,
but
fine.
long
Rain
walks through the
walks in the
city. Yeah,
rainforest.
the rainforest.
There
Yep,
we go.
rainforest is good. Winter, it's snowboarding. At the moment, I have a goal for this year that I'm trying a new, like, crafty hobby every month. So I've tried bookbinding, right, which is pretty fun.
Really?
Yeah, that one's exciting.
That's
Little
awesome. I love
paintings,
watching videos
furniture
on that.
building. Yeah, all
That's
kinds
super
of
cool,
stuff.
man. Right on. Yeah, I kind of I'm a hobby hopper myself. Especially with my neurodivergency, you can't see it on camera here, but I've got a sewing table right next to me where I take breaks periodically. You can sometimes see the 3D printer behind me right there, and I've got a whole thing of watercolor paints back there too. Just need a little something to like keep the brain moving around a bit.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So for everyone joining, I'm putting a couple things in the chat here in just a moment. If you have, first off, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just drop them in the Q&A panel. We'll answer them as much as we can live. We're also going to throw up a couple polls here starting in just a moment. So if you wouldn't mind engaging with those, that would be super awesome. Get a baseline of where you're at and just kind of get some feedback on the topic that we're going through. But I'll start here. I was just typing it out. So if you want to ask any questions afterward, do you have topics you want to suggest? You want to get any support or have an interest in more of these use cases with Orkes Conductor from an agent perspective to workflows in general, just go to community.orkes.io. You'll see it right there in the chat. That's our discourse. You can sign up for a free account. We'd love to see you there. So today we're going to get into AI, all the AI hotness, specifically agents and agentic workflows. And so to start with, I'm going to throw a poll up on the screen here. If I can do this, if I can actually figure this out in Zoom, I would think I know how to do it. Perfect. Okay. There is an agent up there. Sorry, there's a poll up on the screen or it should pop up for all of you. The question is, have you built a project with an AI agent before? And it'd be awesome if you wouldn't mind submitting. That'd be super cool. And while you're all doing that, Haven, I think let's just start from the very, very beginning. As kind of
Mhm.
a little bit of like base setting for everyone, baselining for everybody. What makes an agent an agent? Because like it gets talked about all the time. I see TikToks coming up all the time and other short video formats. I see people talking at events about agents, and is something agentic? Is it an agent? Like I see there's things everywhere. And being in this space and working for Orcus specifically, where we are around it actually a lot, when I hear some of these talks or I see the topics, I read them. I'm like, I don't even know if this presenter actually knows what a. I'm not putting them down, but like, there's a lot of use of the term, and I don't know if everyone quite understands what it means, what an agent actually is, and what makes it an agent. So, would you mind giving everyone kind of a baseline of what that is?
Sure. Well, first off, I'll cut the presenters a little slack myself here. It's a relatively new field, and it's developing quickly, and a lot of the terminology that's out there muddies the water a little bit more, especially when we start talking about not just agents, but agentic workflows and workflows in general, right? There are kinds of different meanings for different things. But if we want to think about really what is agentic or what is an agent, it's autonomy, right? It's the ability to make decisions and do things of its own accord. Now, when we start talking about agentic workflows, and this is where it gets a little bit more confusing because Orkes does workflows and we do agents via workflows, but those are kind of different than an agentic workflow, right? And so when we talk about agents autonomously decide, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and they're making the decision of what's happening next. Historically, agentic workflows, which kind of popped up once LLMs really started becoming popular was more of a human prescribed set of steps. Some of those individual steps might have used LLMs, might have made agentic decisions, but like the overall process was very much human defined. So when you're trying to think of like the difference between an agent and an agentic workflow, that's historically what the distinction has kind of been seen as. In the Orkes world of things, right? Orkes Conductor and Conductor in general is an orchestration platform. We are a workflow engine. And so when we are building out AI agents, we are doing them via workflows, but that is it's just a bit separate from the concept of agentic workflows. So it gets a little confusing, but hopefully it'll make sense when we start walking through hands-on demo and like building something small as an example today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for, I didn't mean to throw people under the bus when I said that. I apologize to all the presenters out there who do that. That is completely on me. I think that's where I think a lot of confusion does come in for anyone who is coming to a session or watching a video or trying to learn about the concept of agents or anything that is agentic. However that term is used, and to your point, is still relatively new. So the term agentic can be either overused or maybe misunderstood in a lot of cases. And I think sometimes what I have noticed is that there's an there's an assumption often that if something connects to some sort of large or small language model from an open provider like an OpenAI or Anthropic or insert one of the many others out there, that inherently means it's either agentic or it's an agent. And one does include the other, but simply connecting to a model doesn't necessarily make something agentic or provide it, as you stated, with having agency to make its own choices or make its own decisions. So I think that's a really interesting one to clarify. So knowing that, what are in conversations you're having with anyone, what are some of the sort of common friction points or hurdles that people are running into when they're trying to build out an agent or even thinking about the concept of introducing something that is agentic into their application?
Yeah, very commonly, and this is for a number of reasons. It has a lot to do with the nature of the customers Orkes is working with, but it's also one of the most important conversations out there is the data that these agents have access to, the data they have access to, and the actions they have access to, and making sure that you have a measure of control over what your agents are doing. Obviously, you don't want to go the entirely prescriptive route like you had mentioned earlier. If you're just using an LLM for summarization, that's not agentic, right? But you need to make sure that there are checks and balances, that you have guardrails in place for doing particular actions in particular ways, right? And controlling what your agents have access to. That's almost always the biggest concern people are having. And again, that's largely because of the space that we work with, because we have a lot of like finance and auditing regulatory companies. So we have a lot of people who are especially concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And like, especially in the industries where, to your point, where there are some governing bodies, well, I shouldn't say governing bodies, but maybe some level of regulation or, things that people are commonly used to, like hearing like HIPAA or FedRAMP. That may not be as commonly known, but FedRAMP, and there's a variety of others out there. SOC 2 is something we deal with a lot, and many others. There are, it's less of that there's a regulatory body saying you can't do something, and it's more of, if you are going to do something, show us how you are in compliance with the things you need to be in compliance with. And I think what I've noticed sometimes is that bridge between how do I show compliance with the things I need to be in compliance with while also delivering either the value to customer, stakeholder, whoever happens to be your internal employee. That bridge between the two is, at least right now, oftentimes muddy. Like, it's not always clear exactly how to do what the things you were describing, to make it feel safe or actually be able to document being safe. So if we think about this from the perspective of a developer, somebody working in an organization and trying to make something that either incorporate agentic properties into an application or into a workflow specifically, and or building an agent, what are some of the considerations developers are having to, or like questions they're asking themselves right now about how to do that? And like, what are they running into? Because I guess I'm very curious, like, what is it like to be a developer trying to do this? You hear everyone talking about it, but I don't often see a lot of developers like sitting down at a table together saying, okay, how do we actually go do this?
Yeah, well, I had a good conversation the other day with some of our leadership here at Orkes as we are actively developing our approach as well to AI agents, agentic workflows, how we want to position ourselves, right? And we were looking at breaking down this conversation of where does the developer fit in and where do the maybe non-developers or analysts or people in the business who are going to be defining these agents fit in. And a lot of the developer-oriented conversation is going to be around like how do we integrate with existing services, existing tools? How do we make sure that the actual components that we want our agents to be able to interact with are exposed in a way that is understandable to not just the AI agents themselves, but the people who are going to be responsible for like defining what kinds of agents they're looking for, right? And so it really does come down to integration. The developers build the integrations, they build the how, they build the what, and then you leave it up to other people to kind of define their agents, define the why these agents take place, and the why these agents are going to be working with these tools.
And that, that seems to be, if I'm hearing this right, and if I'm understanding how these processes all work, it seems to be that is what you just described is the place where specifically the sort of external integration, whatever external is. It could be a third party service, it could be partner organization, some other part of your business potentially. That's where the concept of like an agentic workflow comes in. It seems to come in because a workflow may or may not in the whole have every step be facilitating an agent working, but it could be do a series of things, and then there's an agentic component of it that reaches out to third-party services to do something and makes its own decision about whatever it needs to do there. So I think that's actually a good place to kind of take a quick pause. Thanks everyone who participated in the poll. I really appreciate it. It looks like largely of the people who have submitted so far. It's funny. So the question was, have you built a project with an AI agent before? And largely about 44% have said no way, which I love. About 33% have said yep, and about another 20% or so have said they're only experimenting, which I think probably lines up. And I am curious from everyone who's watching right now, if you did say no way, I would be curious if you're comfortable sharing, put it into the chat and let us know what it is about the concept of agents or these things having agency, agentic workflows, or agentic components. What is it about those that make you uncomfortable or make you be like, no, I'm good right now. I don't want to do that. Just drop that in the chat if you wouldn't mind. I think we'd be really interested to hear that. So I'm going to end that poll. I'm actually going to start up another poll for us that kind of think leads into this next kind of topic, which is the question is, do you know what an agentic workflow is? I mean, hint, hint, Haven did just kind of say it a minute ago, but I put it here because I wanted to get a sense from everyone of, do they actually still understand it? Do you actually still get do you actually, even with this reinforcement, what an agentic workflow is? And going back to the conversation about connecting to external services and developers working with that, can you talk through a bit more of like, this is going to kind of lead into demo territory for us in a few minutes. Um, how do you typically, or how do us at Orkes and other workflow companies tend to view the idea of what an agentic workflow is and what it means to build an agentic workflow? Oh, you're muted there, Haven.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were giving people a minute to go through the prompt, but
no,
yeah,
they can happily submit the poll, and while they're doing that, we can have the conversation. And I'll bring that back up in a few minutes.
Perfect. Yeah. Did you want me to hop into the demo of like what an agentic workflow is at the moment?
Yeah. If you want to talk about it a bit, great. If you want to jump right into a demo and just start showing, that's also amazing.
Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, or maybe not the end of the day, that's a bit grandstanding. Very simple thought process of like, is it an agentic workflow versus is it an agent? Is repetition, right? I mean, if you use an AI or an LLM to make a single decision within your business process, within your workflow, that's an agentic workflow, right? I mean, you're using it to decide what to do, but you've predefined the possible things you can do. So that's going to be a very discrete agentic workflow. Once you evolve it, you get to the next step. You start letting the AI decide not just which path to go to, but can it go and do more actions? Does it need to do more actions to work towards a goal? And that's the other big part of this, right? An agentic workflow is going to make a single decision, given your inputs, given your guardrails, etc., versus an AI agent is going to make any number of decisions to work towards a goal, to work towards a final output, right? And so that's going to be kind of the biggest distinguishing factor. And then as far as like workflows come into play, the way you build out workflows, you asked about Orkes, and you mentioned there are other workflow and other agentic workflow companies, right? You can build an AI agent as a workflow, or you could build a workflow as an agentic workflow, right? I mean, it's a very abstract concept.
Right on. Yeah. If you want to jump into the demo, let's see what this
Sure
looks
thing.
like.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start sharing my screen and just make sure. Oh, actually, let me do this. Make it so I
But
don't.
while you're pulling that up, I do see the responses. Thanks everyone for jumping in and responding. It looks like it's actually a pretty even mix about what an agentic workflow is. Lots of people say, I mean, almost equal numbers of yep and no clue. So, I mean, fair, totally fair. Sort of is also completely acceptable. I'm glad to see that there's everyone's willing to kind of be honest about like where they're at with this. And that's why we're here. And we want to offer whatever information we can and answer any questions you have while we're going through this. Okay. Back to you, Haven.
Cool. Can you see my screen? Just double checking.
Yep, you're good.
Sweet. So the first thing I'm going to do is take 2-3 minutes, just build a very simple agentic workflow. This is not an agent. This is not going to be a fully autonomous process. It's going to be basically a normal workflow with AI into the mix, like a sprinkle of AI to make various decisions, right? And so we're going to keep this fairly abstract. This is just going to be a basic workflow. We're going to first make some API calls. We might be to, as we've been saying a couple of times, using external tools to update data or to fetch data from an external resource. And then once we've made a couple of API calls, we're going to ask an LLM to reason about the results of these APIs, right? We're going to say, hey, use Gemini to go ahead and actually decide based on the outputs of these two API calls to do something, right? And then after we've made the call to the AI, we're giving it the ability to make a decision about what to do. And maybe we've got several paths that actually perform actions on the behest of the LLM, at the behest of the AI after it's made some sort of reasoning, right? This is an agentic workflow. It's a discrete process. We use AI. We use AI as part of this overall reasoning, right? It does make a decision, but it's not going to have a longer running goal. We don't have to worry about memory management. We don't have to worry about context or the overall process. This is at a very basic level what has been thought of as an agentic workflow.
Okay, cool. So it's like you said, it's a discrete scenario where there's things that are happening. It's not an agent standing alone by itself that's constantly running necessarily. When it's triggered to run, it has the ability to make a limited number of decisions, but it does have agency to choose those on its own.
Right. And this could be a larger workflow. This is very simple. If we wanted to, we could have larger decision branches. We could do multiple tasks throughout the chain and have multiple invocations of the LLM to make various decisions. But the overall logical flow, the logical process is very defined. It's going to be as a human is defined at the beginning, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So how, and I'm sure you have a next step that you want to show beyond this, but how would something like this in the scenarios you've seen or conversations you've had, how would an agentic workflow like this how could it fit into a larger application stack for any business?
Yeah. Well, so first, let's maybe talk a little bit about what people have been trying to use agents for, right? And then we'll kind of backtrack a little bit into agentic workflows, because agents have been seen by a lot of people as a very powerful, very easy or cheap way of automating a lot of the human-based tasks that businesses have to do. So some common examples of some fairly early successes of agents are analogs to what agents have historically been. So for example, I was touring apartments the other day and I walked up to the apartment call box and I pressed the call button to call the lobby, and it was a LLM agent that was talking to me, and it had speech to text, text to speech, doing the whole 9 yards. It was very easy to tell it was an agent, but it worked fairly well. That's going to be what agents are for, right? Or how agents operate largely. They make decisions. They say one thing or the next, right? The agentic workflows are going to be very useful for when we're talking about individual decisions. So let's maybe, rather than thinking of it as like a back and forth or working towards a long goal. It's going to be working towards, or not working towards, but rather solving a small problem or a discrete problem. So for example, somewhere we've seen people start to use agentic workflows in our customer base, or to experiment with them anyway, would be in like an insurance or a finance setting. When you look at a particular application and you need to say, okay, well, is this application underneath a certain threshold of risk? If so, we can just approve it right away. If it is above a certain threshold of risk, then maybe you go to a human approval workflow, right? You escalate it to some actual manual process, but you're able to eliminate some of the more low stakes or more low stakes situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where these agentic workflows often are coming into play.
You just triggered a really interesting question. Well, I think it's an interesting question. We'll find out. You triggered a question for me, which is so in the couple examples you just gave, I have seen an example recently, which I think it might be one you were relating to, that one of our engineers had built out, which is kind of a fraud management agentic workflow where from what I could tell, the auspice of it essentially is, and the way I kind of described to others when I was showing it off was the idea that let's think you're a business that uses Stripe as an example, or some other payment system, Square, whatever, and let's say their tooling flags a particular transaction as potentially fraud, and that would then send like a webhook or something else to your workflow or trigger your workflow to run, and that workflow, to your point, just takes a bit of information, puts it into the proper text, and then sends it off to an LLM. And then from there, whatever result it gets back, the workflow, because it's agentic, can then make its own decision about, based on what I heard from this, I can choose my own which path to go down. And I guess what I'm curious about is um, what what is the value or what is the benefit for a developer or for somebody kind of thinking through the architecture of an app like that over the long term? What's the value of building something like that that is to be agentic in that way? Like how does it help a developer over the lifetime compared with simply mapping those paths out by yourself, like manually by yourself, so they're predefined?
Yeah, it depends a lot on the use case, but what we've seen in financial industry, in insurance industry, in a lot of these places where we have these processes that are being defined, those business processes are being defined very often by business users, right? They're not being defined by developers. It's not the developers writing an if statement that's going to say, if this, do that, right? It's going to be many times you have people doing this that probably shouldn't have to worry about writing code. That maybe they do because of the tools that are available to them today, but it would be more useful for them to be able to configure an agent using the existing underlying infrastructural tools, APIs, and services that the engineers have built, and describe the outcomes. So say, hey, if I mean, I'm sure you've made some application that required a credit check, and most people have a concept of a credit score and know that I can say if a user's credit score, or I guess an applicant's credit score, is over 700, maybe we just approve their application anyway, and I don't need to know the Python code or the data structures or where this data lives in what database to be able to tell an LLM who does have access to those tools, right? Who's connected to your database, who's connected to your services, who can get the information and reason about it. All I have to say as somebody who's configuring the agent is, if a user has a credit score greater than 700, approve it automatically, which is, of course, only one of many checks that would be involved in that kind of approval process. But it allows people who are maybe not developers to go ahead and actually define those processes.
That makes sense. Another question that actually just came through from someone attending. Michael asked, so a workflow without an LLM is just a workflow. Once an LLM is in the mix, where the result determines the next step, it's an agentic workflow?
That's a pretty good summarization. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, because you can use LLMs for non-agentic decision or non-agentic things, right? So if you have, say, take a website and summarize it, that's something that an AI or an LLM is involved in, but that's not exactly an agentic workflow because it's not making a decision of what to do next. If you have, at the end of the day, an AI deciding to do one thing or another, or a set of things, right? That's an agentic workflow. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you. All right. I'll hand it back to you for more of the demo if you like.
Sweet. Yeah. Let me go continue sharing. So this is a very simple agentic workflow. I'm now going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how we might build an agent in a tool like Orkes, right? This is going to be a very simple agent, and I've actually condensed my part of a bigger project that I've got going on in the background. We've condensed the prompt a little bit, and so this might be scary because it's prompts and there's a lot of text. But I'm just gonna walk through it real quick, and hopefully it'll make a good amount of sense. So essentially, we're going to be building a customer success agent for a software as a service company. Who knows what that company might be named? We're going to handle the relationship with a particular customer. We're going to provide the customer information, so this will be an input to this prompt, as well as the context of everything that's been done so far. You might think of this as the memory of this project, or of this process, right? The memory of this agent for this particular execution. We're working towards a goal, right? In this case, the goal is just handling the relationship with a particular customer. We want them to be as happy as possible, but there's not necessarily a concrete end state, right? The only actions that might be taken multiple times are to wait and to escalate. I actually removed wait for this demo purpose because we just want a very simple customer success bot, right? Each other action should be taken at most once. In this case, those other actions are just getting data, right? They're just tools. They're accessing HubSpot or they're accessing Salesforce, or actually not Salesforce in this example, but Slack rather. And we don't need to take those multiple times. In the actual non-demo version of this, we probably want them to be able to make different HubSpot calls or different Slack calls to get messages from different channels or get information about related customers or related issues, right? But these are all just my examples of actions that could be taken. The actions themselves are fairly straightforward. Escalate is for the LLM to say, I don't know what I'm doing, ask a human for help. This is going to be fairly standard in most agentic processes, right? Get HubSpot data, get Slack history, open a Zendesk ticket. So in the case of this is customer success, we might want to escalate to an engineer. We can open a Zendesk ticket to do so. I'm going to pause here for a second because I just ran through the text. And I want to make sure that if there are questions about this prompt or about any of the actions that we're taking, that there's a chance to ask them. This is a very, very lean prompt. If you were building a full agent, you would likely want to have quite a bit more prompt engineering go into this process. This is what we've got right now. Any questions from you, Jeff, or anyone in chat?
No, none from me and none yet from the attendees. But yeah, if anybody does have a question, feel free to drop it in Q&A at any time and we'll get to it as quickly as we can.
Cool. Then I will go hop back into creating our workflow definition. We're actually going to go and save this and make a new one for the sake of building out an agent or a very basic agent, but this will be an agent. So we'll give this a name, our customer success agent, right? And give it some description, doesn't particularly matter. For input parameters, let's just go ahead and specify our customer information here. So customer name, customer ID, maybe a Slack channel that the customer is a member of that we would want to scan messages for, right? These are going to be what we need to actually start this agent process. The first thing we want to do in our workflow to facilitate this agentic process is we're gonna have some kind of memory management. Now, a quick aside, what I'm showing today is the art of the possible in Orkes Conductor as it is today. We are working towards having some more agent development oriented tools that don't require things like super fine-grained or super hands-on memory management, right? But I'm going to show a little bit of the under the hood stuff today because this is more of an abstract tool. So first, we're going to use set variable, and we're going to call this memory, and we're just going to set this to an empty list. As we run through this process, our agent will make decisions, and we will populate this list with the decisions the agent makes, as well as the outputs of the actions, so that over time, they can build out this memory of what they've done throughout this process as they were working towards their goal, right? Next, this is going to be the big kind of distinguishing factor that will make it very obvious right away how we differentiate between this agent process and the agentic workflow from before. And that's going to be a while loop. We're going to configure a loop. We're going to say, hey, this workflow could potentially run forever. So we're going to say for our condition of running this loop, return true. Always continue to run this workflow. We can just run it forever. I'm going to change this so we only keep the last 5 iterations in this while loop itself. That's to make sure that the conductor doesn't run out of memory if we have like 10,000 iterations, but we'll keep track of what the actual actions are in this variable, and so we don't care too much about losing these iterations. Finally, we're going to go and actually call our LLM. So we're going to add an LLM text complete, and we are actually going to run this. So we're going to go pick Haven Gemini integration. We're using the Gemini 2.0 Flash model. I think there are a couple of newer ones at this point, but for the purposes of the demo, this is good enough. And we're going to use the Customer Success Prompt Mini. I have the other one, which is a little bit more involved, has more actions, but this is the one I read earlier, so we'll just keep that for now. Now, our 2 inputs that we defined in the Customer Prompt Mini are the customer info and the context. We could rename this to memory if we wanted to, because that's what we're going to be passing in here, but those 2 things are very frequently interchangeable. So for the customer info, we're just going to pass that workflow input, and we can pass this entire map in that we defined earlier here. So this will contain the customer name, their ID, their Slack channel, right? And then for the context, we can actually use the workflow variable memory, and it'll pass that whole array in for us. And so now if we wanted to, we can actually go ahead and run this once. Now I'm actually going to add a terminate workflow, not that one, add a terminate workflow here so we don't iterate it multiple times, right? But we can go ahead and run this for 1 iteration and just see what we get. For customer name, let's say Mega Man Corp, customer ID, 34, and some dummy Slack channel name, right? We can run this workflow now, and if I formatted things correctly, we will see that our LLM text complete took in as input the customer info that we provided, the empty array for our memory, and provided some output saying, okay, understand, I'm the customer success agent from Mega Man Corp, and their Slack channel is this. And we notice if we go all the way through, eventually we get to the action, which is get Slack history, which is one of our actions we provided here. So we can see we're able to make a single call. How do we chain this all together? How do we build an actual agent, right? How do we use this? Well, we're going to do something very straightforward. We're going to go ahead and make a switch task. Actually, before we make a switch task, let's log the action that we're taking into our memory so that we know for future iterations what we actually did. So let's call the set variable task again. We're going to update memory. We're going to set it to an array containing the value of this task, right? So we're going to say, this isn't totally clear, and if it's your first time seeing Orkes, don't worry too much about the syntax for now. Just know I'm getting the output of the LLM text complete ref, right? Dot output dot, and I think it's either result or response. Let's go find out. Output dot result. So we're saying output dot result, and we're including the output of the LLM, which you'll notice does include the thought process, right? So we're able to know over time what the thought process of the agent is into this array. Then the other thing I have to do really quickly is kind of a workaround for now, but this will essentially merge the array I've provided here with whatever the existing array is for the memory of this agent. So we will, in other words, run through and make probably multiple actions, and this array will grow over time. Our switch case is then going to have various branches, and each of these branches should correspond with one of our actions here. So we're going to say get HubSpot data, right? We're going to get HubSpot data. Copy next for get Slack history. Open Zendesk ticket. And then for the default case, this is actually going to be our escalate branch. If we either return escalate or if we don't match any of the other actions, we should escalate to a human. So we can just go ahead and put that here. Open Zendesk ticket, get Slack history, and get HubSpot data are all just going to make API calls for now, and I'm not going to hook these up to the actual data sources that they would contain. Also, brief aside here, we're seeing people move towards calling agents from agents. So more likely than not, as companies grow, you would have a dedicated Zendesk agent that manages all of your Zendesk-related actions, and the same would go for Slack and HubSpot for doing things like sending notifications as well as crawling for message history. Right? But for the purposes of this demo, they're just going to be simple API calls. And then to make sure we're populating our memory, because we want to inform our agent's decision process, as well as actually let them know what their actions did downstream. We're going to make these more set variable calls to do very similar processes, right, for each of these API calls. So we're going to set variable, and again, this should be memory, this should be an array containing the value of this API call, so http ref1 1.output.response.body, and we got that merge here again as well for true. So we can go ahead and actually merge those arrays. And we'll do this for both of these two various actions for getting data, right? So that we can go ahead and actually update that data. HTTP ref2.output.response.body. Boom. And again, merge. So now what we're going to do when we actually run this workflow is it's going to get the output from the LLM. It's going to do something, right, to go down one of these processes. And then we're going to go ahead and eventually probably reach this human process to wait for escalation. As I pointed out in the prompt itself, I have a wait option that in the example of the full-scale customer success agent would allow the LLM to say wait a few minutes or hours between doing evaluations, right? But for the purposes of this, it's just going to reach that end step of escalation fairly quickly. The other thing that we are going to want in our agent for certain actions is this concept of guardrails, right? Now, getting Slack history and getting HubSpot data are examples of tasks or of actions that are they're just getting data. They're not mutating external state. And so really, we don't care too much if the LLM does them multiple times. But for something like opening a Zendesk ticket, we should very explicitly say that an agent cannot open multiple Zendesk tickets for a given thought process, or this was triggered by something, right? We might want to have that kind of guardrail in place. So we can go ahead and either build that into the prompt, right? And we've tried to do this, or we've explained that it should only ever happen once per workflow. But there's a possibility that it could happen multiple times anyway. So I call that out here. I'm not going to actually build this out for the purposes of the demo, but what you might do is have another switch case inside of here that makes an evaluation of like, look, we've already opened a Zendesk ticket within the last, say, 5 hours. We don't need to open another one, or maybe we need to escalate to a human to open another one, right? For now, though, let's just go to our JavaScript or go to our switch case and make a decision about how we actually go down this particular path. We're going to go ahead for switch case value. We're going to use the LLM text complete ref.output .result, right? So we're saying get the LLM's actual output. And we're actually going to use JavaScript because that's just going to make it very easy for us to reason about what that output looks like. We're going to say if the switch case value includes escalate, right? Return escalate. Otherwise, let's just make a list of actions equals get HubSpot data, get Slack history, right? And open Zendesk ticket. And then for action, I need a action of actions. And our editor here is admittedly not the most luxurious experience. If the switch case value includes action, return action. And then finally, if none of those match, we're just going to escalate again, right? And I spelled that wrong, but that's okay because it's our default case anyway. But let's update that. So now we're essentially saying on each iteration, check the LLM, ask it what to do that, and then it will loop back to the beginning of our loop. Let's see if I've wired everything up correctly, and if I did, hopefully this will run, and we'll see several iterations go through. All right, so it's made at least one decision. It's gotten the Slack history. It's now going to go back, and it's thinking again. And we can actually go to the variables tab in our workflow and see what each of these processes look like. So we say, okay, it understands the problem. It is the customer success agent. It's going to get Slack history. This is the result of that API call to get Slack history. It's not any actually useful data. And as a result of it not being any useful data, the agent's going to make the decision to ask for Slack data again It's probably going to do this several times because we're going to keep returning dummy data, but eventually we see it makes the thought process of, okay, I've retrieved the Slack history multiple times without actually analyzing it. I also tried getting HubSpot data since I don't have access to actual data from those calls, still missing information. It tries to get Slack history again. And then finally, it says, okay, I don't actually have the data that I need to make any kind of decision. It doesn't even have data to make open a Zendesk ticket, right? Which is good that it doesn't in this case, because it wouldn't be a very useful Zendesk ticket. So instead, it just escalates, and this goes and waits for some human input. That was a lot of talking, a lot of demo, but that's going to be our very basic agent, right? I mean, it handles that whole process. It makes decisions. It makes reasonable decisions with what it has, the limited information it has. But we could very easily, if we were to hook these up to actually call Slack and actually call HubSpot and actually call Zendesk, it would be able to make reasonable decisions there.
Very cool. Yeah, no questions have come through yet, but I did want to let everyone know that I'm going to throw up our third poll for the event. So that is going to be showing up for everyone right now. And I'll leave it open for the next 5 or so minutes, so anyone has a chance to go in there. The question is, what's been the biggest challenge you've hit when building AI agents? So that's out there for you. Feel free to contribute to that if you'd like. Yeah, I really enjoyed not just seeing how this got built out that you did in the demo, Haven, but also how quickly you were able to do this. And it's one of the things I found really interesting about building agentic workflows using Orkes Conductor specifically, is that in a large part, you can start off by essentially modeling out what you're trying to build before you have to configure anything, which is really nice because especially if you're collaborating with a team or if you're doing research, you can almost do your design work like you would on a whiteboard and then go back and say, okay, I think I'm ready to actually start getting this connected. Then you can run your testing, which is really, I think, makes it a very flexible platform for building this sort of thing. And actually, yes, a question did just come through from Michael. This was cool. Can you go over the do while part? I didn't quite get why the value is set to true.
Yeah, sure. So if you think of this as like, let's maybe explain a little. This is essentially your inner while statement, right? So in most programming languages, you would have while some condition. This is just that condition. This is what we're evaluating at this point, right? So in this case, we're returning while true. The two examples that are given, and I can change this really quickly. This is fixed number, right? So this is saying if the number of iterations is less than the number that we pass into our scripts, and in this case, we would pass 5, return true to continue running this loop, which is to say, run another iteration, run 5 iterations. If it is greater than or equal to that number, return false and exit the loop. So when we say to return true and we just do a return true, that's essentially just saying while true, right? Or run forever, or in languages with like the loop construct, right? It would just run forever. Of course, we have our human escalation here, and then more likely than not, if we're talking about like a real agentic workflow, we would probably have a separate branch in our switch case that would like terminate the workflow, as well as notify somebody that, hey, this workflow is terminated, and then end it, right? But the agent's thought process should be able to run forever. And so this should be able to be an infinite loop until the agent decides that it's done thinking about whatever this problem is. And hopefully that all makes sense.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what Michael says. Thank you for doing that. And one question I had specifically on your escalation piece there, where it's like, oh, we want it to, in that scenario you gave, we're like, because it's dummy data, we want it to escalate. We don't want it to, just create a bunch of tickets off of dummy data necessarily. But in that situation where it wants to escalate, you had mentioned something earlier about other third party, external connections. And also agents calling agents. I could also see a situation here, and please tell me if I'm off base, where in that scenario, you wouldn't even have to necessarily build out the additional agentic components in this flow. You could have a separate either agentic workflow or agent that handles the escalation path using, let's say, a pager duty or something to that effect, or some other sort of human engagement that it could call and say, okay, at this point, go run this other process because we've crossed a threshold, and that's where this other scenario comes into play. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely. And you've touched on a couple of good points, one of which is going to talk a little bit more about what Orkes's strengths are that kind of strays off the path of the AI conversation. But integrating with other components. You gave some great examples of integrating with other agents, with other agentic workflows, but potentially if you're using an orchestration platform, you're going to do something like call a subworkflow, so call a separate workflow. And again, this could be an agentic workflow, or this could just be a very simple predefined set of actions for saying, make 3 API calls, right? And we can go ahead and, well, actually, I modified this to make 3 API calls and an inference, a JavaScript function, right? But you can go ahead and assemble these things together so that the actual agent might not know everything that is undergoing the sub workflow here for the default escalation case. But that case itself can be very, very complex. And so going back to the earlier conversation when you asked about like, hey, we're thinking about how a developer interacts with this and versus how non-developers interact with this. A lot of the conceptual differentiation is like a developer is going to build individual agents potentially, or individual agentic workflows and processes, and then potentially you'll have somebody involved who's an analyst or who's going to be defining the business process, and they can use those to actually define like, okay, I want my agent to do these things, but I don't need to know how those actually work, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Excellent. And interesting. Some of the polls have been coming back. There was this was one where I had a variety of different answers available to people for what could be their biggest challenges. And the 3 that have been getting attention right now are for biggest challenges when building agents is managing inputs, outputs across tools, scaling and observability, and haven't tried yet, which is totally fair as well. And as you continue on the demo, we've got about 15 minutes or a little bit under 15 minutes left. As if there's any other piece of the demo, I'd love to see some additional, or if there's some touch points you want to make on the concept of building these a little bit safer, guardrails, that sort of thing, because you have mentioned that already. If there's any scale things to talk about here as well. And then, and Michael actually made a really interesting comment in the questions. It says, so you'd likely want to hit the limit. You'd likely want to limit the iterations at a certain point to make sure it doesn't go haywire.
Potentially, yeah. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that, right? We can talk in either strict orchestration capabilities. So things like we can always go back to this example where we say a fixed number and make it use, 500 or what have you. Possibly when you run your workflow, you could actually specify, hey, I want my workflow to have a timeout of I only want this to run for like 3,600 seconds, right? Before we time out this workflow, that's another potential option. Those are less on the AI side of things than the actual orchestration of an agent, but those are all definitely valid and play into what Jeff was asking too a little bit about like guardrails, right? The guardrails themselves, we didn't go into too much because they're at the end of the day, they are things you will build as part of your agent process, but those are going very much back into like the developer or engineer oriented. Like I'm just going to define these processes with these guardrails myself, right? What I think is interesting and that I didn't touch on because it does to the questions or the answers that you provided in the poll responses get very complicated. Inputs and outputs, right? Inputs more than outputs. Outputs are not actually that difficult for LLMs to reason about because when you return like your structured JSON, I guess calling JSON structured is not entirely accurate, but it's relatively structured, right, and generally pretty self-descriptive format-wise. But tool inputs is something that's very difficult to do for a lot of these LLMs. We do have these days, MCP is gaining a lot of traction. Orkes will be supporting that for tools in the not too distant future. And then even prior to doing things like MCP tool integration, even just providing JSON schemas, which Conductor supports out of the box for various tasks, right? You can include those for your particular tools and then specify those as part of your prompts, as part of your context to your LLM to describe what the inputs that your various branches expect. Today in Orkes, that is still largely a manual process of doing like mapping of inputs for individual paths, right? I didn't do any of that today, but if I wanted to, for instance, make a GET request with a query parameter here, I would have to know how to extract that or have an extraction step from the LLM's output to say, hey, give me this result and pass it in there. So that is a big challenge, and that's something that's still developing for Orkes as well as others. But the schema part does make it a little bit easier.
I'm glad you brought up the MCP piece and the other integrations, because I think that'll be a really good topic for a future conversation. Without getting too deep into it this time, there's just a lot, I think, of nuance there, but that is obviously something that's going to be really important to us. Excellent. Anything else on the sort of guide rail side, or maybe any like top suggestions for how best to consider architecting an agentic workflow, things to keep in mind for people who are looking to build their own or at least run something that we already have out there?
For guardrails, I think what you're going to find is guardrails end up being very agent specific, right? And so while you might have guardrails for individual, or well, you will have guardrails for individual actions, they should always be like scoped to the agent itself. You're going to build them using likely the same tools you build the rest of your workflow with, as far as switch cases and validation on the data itself. I think guardrails are going to be not the most difficult part, close to it, but they're so business oriented that I should say business case oriented, business case specific, right? That it's hard to give a lot of more information or advice without talking to specific use cases.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That makes total sense. Awesome, dude. Sincerely appreciate you doing the demo. I think it's really helpful not just to see it visually when you're looking at Orkes Conductor, but it's also really helpful to actually walk through like you did and show what it's like to actually build one of these out. And granted, this is a demo, so for anyone thinking, how did you just come up with this off the top of your head? That's not what happened. But it is great to see that as you do it, there's largely not a ton that you have to do to build this out to get what you're looking for. And the power here is, I always love that phrase, as cheesy as it might be sometimes, the art of the possible. The idea that try something that's already set up for you, that someone's already built into, spend a few minutes and you get it working like this particular example, and see it work. And then play with it. Say, oh, well, if I had 5 more minutes, what else could I do here? I have 15 more. I got a little time this afternoon. What else could I add to this to tune it to make it my own? And you start to very quickly see that the world kind of opens up a whole heck of a lot for you with what you can do and what you can make on your own. So real quick, I'm going to end that poll that we had. I have one last poll that I'm going to put up for everybody who's still here. If you wouldn't mind, this is going to be just kind of a little bit of feedback that I would love to get from everybody. If you don't mind, I'll put that out there. Just a couple open-ended questions. If you're willing to share, that would be great. Haven, any parting thoughts we want to leave with everybody before we wrap?
Ooh, parting thoughts. I would say play with it, right? Whether it's Orkes Conductor or another tool, I think building agents does have a lot of, obviously, business appeal. It will change the way people do business over the next couple of years, but it's also fun. It's fun to see these thought processes and to put these pieces together. And there are a lot of tools out there that are growing. We've got a way to do it on Orkes Playground, which I'm sure Jeff is going to link here in a second. But whatever your method might be, reach out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I posted links for everyone who's here, and I'll post them in the description on YouTube when we share this video later on for that sort of team replay. I put in there our Orkes community on Discourse. You can find a link there to our developer playground, so you can go jump in right now for free, sandbox environment, do all the fun hotness there. And I just posted a link to our GitHub repo called Awesome Conductor Apps, where we have a variety of different use cases that have been built out and put there. There's instructions in the READMEs. You can bring those JSON files down that are just the workflows, and they'll tell you exactly what to do. You can go set it up. You can also go into Developer Playground, and under the Template Explorer on the left-hand side, you can actually add in any of the workflows that are there, and you can start working with them immediately. So we have a lot of use cases prepped that you can just jump in and get to work right away, rather than having to start with, where do I begin with this? How do I fill this out, etc. So excellent. I'll let some of those feedback come in through. Really appreciate it for everybody. Haven, thank you again for being here. It's always great to have you. And like I said to everyone else, we have a lot of topics coming up over the next month or two. Our next virtual meetup, I believe, is on June 3rd. We were going to do it the last week of May. However, we've got a number of different events that Orkes is going to be at, from Web Summit Vancouver. We've got a AI event in the Bay Area that we're going to be at in person. So we're at a lot of in-person events over the next few months. So you'll see us on our Luma calendar, which is lu.ma/Orkes. I'll put that in the chat as well. And we'll have a lot more events showing up there. And then first week of June, we'll have our next virtual meetup, and we're going to have kind of a neat little surprise that we're going to be demoing, I hope. So stay tuned for that. And as always, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. We're going to wrap, and we'll see you all on the next one. Take care.